The first snow of the season came early to the San Juan Mountains, lacing the pines with quiet silver and driving elk to lower valleys. Above the tree line, wind swept the granite ridges with a howling that might have been mistaken for a morning cry, if anyone had been there to hear it. But the high passes were empty now, save for birdsong and memory. Down near the river, where the cottonwoods still clung to yellow leaves, a girl rode alone on a shaggy bay pony. She wore a buckskin dress cinched with a leather belt, and over her shoulders hung a faded blanket, once crimson, now sun-bleached to the color of clay. Her hair, dark as river stones, was braided in two long cords, each tied with sinew. She had the look of the Ute about her, angular cheekbones, an alert stillness in her shoulders, but her eyes were pale green, like a winter meadow under thin sun. Her name was Clara Hart. 12 years ago, her family had been part of a wagon train bound for California, lost and scattered in the high country when winter came sudden and cruel. She'd been 6 when it happened. She remembered little but snow, and her mother's hand, stiff and cold, brushing her cheek as the wind took her cries. The Utes had found her days later, starving and curled in the roots of a fallen pine. A woman named Ronnie, herself childless after many miscarriages, carried Clara back to the camp and wrapped her in fox furs. Now, at 18, Clara was returning to the world she'd been born into. Not because she wanted to, but because Ronnie had died from lung sickness the past spring, and the elders had said it was time. "You belong to two peoples," one of the old men had told her, his voice raspy with years. "Now you must learn what that means." She'd left behind her name in the Ute tongue, though it still echoed in her chest, returned to the name given by white blood, though it tasted foreign in her mouth: Clara. The syllables felt brittle, like stepping on ice not yet frozen through. She crossed into white country at dawn, passing a crude sign nailed to a cedar post: Parsonsville, 2 miles. The land here was low and muddy, dotted with homesteads and smoke trails. Fences cut across the hills like scars. She slowed the pony, unsure. At the town edge, a boy spotted her first, no older than 10, with straw-colored hair and wide eyes. He ran toward the main street shouting something, and by the time Clara reached the church steeple, a crowd had formed. They stared. Some stepped back. She dismounted quietly, patting the pony's neck, and waited. A woman with a stiff bun and a gray shawl spoke first. "Are you lost, girl?" "No," Clara said, her voice calm, even. "I was born Clara Hart. My parents died in the mountains. I was raised by the Utes." There was a hush, then murmurs. A man in a brown coat stepped forward, his face pinched. "You saying you was raised by Indians?" She nodded. He snorted. "Well, that explains the smell." A few laughed, but most just stared, uncertain, unsettled. One girl about her age whispered something behind her hand. Clara caught the word savage. She didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her pack and pulled out a folded paper, her birth certificate, crumpled but intact, the ink faded but legible. A preacher took it, looked it over, then looked at her with something between suspicion and pity. "You'll want to speak with the town matron," he said. "Mrs. Eldon, she runs the boarding house." Clara thanked him. No one answered her. The boarding house sat on a rise above town, a squat whitewashed building with a sagging porch and a brass bell. When Clara entered, the woman behind the desk barely looked up. "I don't have charity rooms," she said. "I can pay," Clara answered, placing a pouch of coins on the counter. She traded her bow and trapping gear for silver before leaving. The woman's eyes narrowed, then softened a little. "You'll take your meals in the kitchen." "Not with the others." Clara nodded once. "That's fine." That night she lay on a straw mattress under a wool blanket that smelled of mothballs and mildew. Outside, wind whispered through the gaps in the shutters. Inside, her body ached with the absence of home. The hum of night insects, the dry grass underfoot, the murmur of Ute voices around the fire, all of it gone. She closed her eyes and whispered Ronnie's name. In the morning, Clara put on her dress again, worn but mended, patterned with quill work, and went looking for work. She didn't yet know that the hardest part would not be finding food or shelter. It would be surviving the gaze of a world that saw her as a question it didn't want answered. The sun rose behind a bank of low clouds, casting Parsonsville in dull gray light. Chickens scratched in yards rimmed by frost, and smoke rose slow from kitchen chimneys. Clara moved through town like shadow between stones, seen, noted, and unspoken of. She walked with her chin level, shoulders loose, as Ronnie had taught her, to meet the world not with fear but with presence. She found work at the livery stable, mucking stalls and brushing down horses. The owner, a one-armed man named Gilmore, said little beyond instructions, but he paid fair and didn't ask questions. That counted for something. In the evenings, she ate alone at the edge of the kitchen, beside the dry sink. The cook, a red-cheeked woman named Bet, left her plate near the hearth and never once asked her name. The other boarders avoided her gaze, though once, a young man with wire spectacles offered her a quiet nod. She didn't return it. Not out of coldness, but because she'd learned that kindness from strangers often came with strings. By the second week, whispers followed her into town like dust behind a cart. Folks watched her from behind curtains, their mouths tight with judgment they mistook for righteousness. A boy spat near her boots outside the general store. A woman crossed the street when Clara approached, clutching her daughter's hand like a shield. Still, she endured. She saved every coin Gilmore gave her and slept with her satchel under her pillow. She carved tiny animals from scraps of wood behind the stable, foxes, deer, even a bear once, and gave them to children too young to understand fear. Some took them with delight. Others were snatched back by parents who muttered things like unclean or heathen. Clara never raised her voice, never explained. She learned long ago that words seldom reached ears already shut tight. One afternoon, as she hauled a water bucket from the river, a voice called her name, soft, unsure. Clara, Clara Hart. She turned. A man stood on the bank, maybe 30, with rough hands and eyes the same shade as dying grass. He wore a deputy's badge on his vest, though it gleamed like it was new. "I'm Eli Hargrove," he said. "I remember your folks. Barely. My pa was a freighter. Said your father once fixed a broken axle for him up in Gunnison." Clara nodded slowly. "I don't remember." He looked away, then cleared his throat. "I heard you came back. Thought I'd say, it's good you made it." She didn't answer, not out of rudeness, but because she didn't know what to say to a man speaking kindly without pity. Eli scratched his chin. "You working?" "Yes." "You need anything?" "No." He studied her a moment longer. Then he tipped his hat and walked on. She watched him go, the way his boots sank into the mud, steady and unhurried. For the first time since arriving, her chest ached with something other than hunger or silence. That night, as snow began to fall again, Clara dreamt of firelight and drums, of hands painting ochre on her cheeks during the spring ceremonies, of Ronnie's voice telling stories beneath the stars, her breath visible in the cold, her laughter like pine smoke. She woke with tears on her face. The days thickened with cold. One morning she found a red smear near the stable doors, a dead rabbit, gutted and left splayed. A message, she guessed. She buried it without a word, then worked through the day with blood beneath her fingernails. Gilmore said nothing when he saw her wrists bruised from hauling hay bales too heavy to carry alone. Maybe he didn't notice. Maybe he did and chose silence over complication. Clara didn't ask. On Sunday, the church bells rang like knives. She didn't attend. Instead, she walked into the woods and knelt by a frozen stream, whispering the old words Ronnie had taught her, words for protection, for patience, for staying strong when the wind pressed hard. She didn't see the girl watching her from the trees. The next afternoon, the same girl, a farmer's daughter named Rose, no older than 16, appeared near the stable. She stood awkwardly, twisting her bonnet strings. "I saw you praying," she said, "in the forest." Clara looked up from her carving, a small bird half finished in her palm. "I think it was praying," Rose said quickly. "I didn't mean to spy." It was beautiful." Clara handed her the carving without a word. Rose blinked at it. "You made this." Clara nodded. "It's lovely." It was the first true kindness she'd been shown in weeks, and it left her throat dry. She turned away before emotion showed. The girl left soon after, holding the bird like it might break. The next day, a stone was thrown through the stable window. The message burned into the wall was made with soot and anger. "Go back to the trees. Clara swept the shards into a pan and fixed the glass herself. When Gilmore returned from town, he eyed the window, then her. "You planning on staying long?" Clara looked him dead in the eye. "I don't know." He nodded once. "Keep to your work." That night she rubbed balm on her hands and thought of the river, of riding bareback across red mesas, of songs sung in the language of the land. She wondered how long she could hold on to those memories before the cold world around her carved them away. Winter deepened its grip. Frost crept inside the stable, painting delicate veins across the water troughs and leaving the horses' breath thick in the air. Clara moved slower now, her joints stiff from cold and work, but her gaze stayed sharp. She had the quiet patience of one used to watching weather, waiting for shifts in wind and sky. By the start of January, the snow lay in deep drifts between buildings. Men cursed as they shoveled paths to their doorsteps. Children used sleds made from old planks and barrels, laughter echoing through the brittle air. Clara kept to the edges of these sounds, not unseen but unwanted, always too close to something they feared without understanding. But Rose came again. She brought a scarf the color of wild mint and offered it shyly, hands trembling in the cold. "Mama says you're strange, but I don't think you are," she whispered. "You don't talk much, but you see everything." Clara took the scarf gently, fingers brushing Rose. "Thank you." That single word felt like more than speech. It was acknowledgement, the quiet agreement of souls briefly aligned. Rose smiled, and Clara let herself return it just barely. After that, the girl came often. She asked questions, curious and earnest, and Clara answered only some. How do you track deer in snow? What does a hawk's cry mean at dusk? What does it feel like to live without clocks, without walls? "Like breathing," Clara said once, and Rose sat in silence after that, as though trying to remember what true breath felt like. Then came the storm. It arrived sudden as a cough, rolling down from the mountains with dark clouds and wind like whips. Snow fell sideways, piling against doors and fences. Gilmore shut the stable early and told Clara to sleep in the loft, closer to the animals' warmth. That night, the blizzard howled so fiercely she feared the roof would lift. The horses stomped and shifted, nervous. Clara climbed down once to check their blankets, whispering to each beast in turn, hands steady even as the walls groaned. By dawn, the world lay buried. Smoke curled only from a few chimneys. Footpaths were lost, fences flattened. At the boarding house, Mrs. Eldon refused her breakfast. "You're not staying here for free just 'cause snow fell," the woman snapped. "Either work off your keep or find somewhere else." Clara didn't argue. She grabbed a shovel and began clearing paths before anyone asked. She worked until her gloves soaked through, until the skin on her knuckles split. When she paused, it was only to drink melted snow cupped in her palm. Eli found her there, pale from cold, hair flecked with ice. "You'll kill yourself like that," he said, taking the shovel from her grip. "I'm fine." He didn't press, just cleared alongside her. After an hour, he pointed to the old church. "There's a stove in the cellar. I can make coffee." Clara hesitated, then nodded. Inside, the warmth hit her like a wave. Eli poured the coffee into tin cups, then added sugar from his coat pocket. "Brought some from home," he said. "My mother used to hoard it like gold." She accepted the cup, sipped. The sweetness startled her. "Thank you." He studied her a moment. "Why'd you come back? Could have stayed where you were." Clara didn't answer right away. The stove hissed, wood crackling inside like a memory trying to speak. "I didn't come to belong," she said at last, "just to understand what I left behind." Eli nodded, slow. "And what have you found?" Her lips thinned. "Walls, fences." Questions wrapped in fear. He didn't look away. "You don't scare me." She raised her eyes to his, and for the first time saw no pity there, only something quiet and unresolved, like the land after snowfall. Later that week, Rose brought a gift hidden in her apron, a book of pressed flowers. "They're from my mother's garden last summer," she said. "You can't find these in the woods, I think." Clara traced a finger over the brittle stems. "They're beautiful. I don't want you to forget color." Clara swallowed hard, but kindness, as she'd learned, always stirred something uglier in its wake. One evening, as she returned from the stable, two boys stepped from the alley behind the mercantile. Their breath steamed in the cold. "You think you're better than us?" one sneered. "Too good to speak plain." Clara kept walking. "You wear that heathen hide like it's a crown. Ain't no queen here." The second boy reached for her braid. Clara turned fast, eyes hard. "Touch me, and you'll regret it." But the boy laughed. "Or what? You'll dance around a fire and chant." Then a voice broke the air, sharp and clear. "She'll knock your teeth out, is what she'll do." Eli stood at the end of the alley, hand resting near his pistol. The boys paled and scattered. Clara didn't thank him, just nodded once, then kept walking. Eli caught up. "They'll keep coming," he said quietly. "The more you endure, the more they'll test." "I know. You don't have to do it alone." She stopped, snow crunching beneath her boots. For a long moment, she looked at him, this man with storm-colored eyes and hands shaped by labor. "I've always done it alone," she said. He nodded, not in defeat but recognition. And so the weeks passed. The snow began to melt by late February, drawing rivers through the streets and uncovering all that winter had buried. But the thaw did not bring peace. It brought reckoning. Spring seeped into the bones of Parsonsville like a secret. It came not with fanfare, but with small, persistent signs: the brittle sound of ice cracking in gutters, the muddy perfume of thawing earth, the sudden green whisper at the base of dry trees. Horses shed their winter coats in ragged clumps. Birds returned by the dozens, their songs waking Clara before sunrise. She didn't mind. She rose early and walked barefoot through the wet grass behind the stable, letting the cold sting her soles. It grounded her, reminded her she was still flesh, still here. The townsfolk, too, began to emerge from their winter quiet, though their eyes hadn't softened with the season. If anything, the thaw brought sharper edges. Talk turned to planting and repairs, but also to rumors. Whispers of stolen goods, of curses, of a girl who prayed to foreign gods and walked in the woods alone. Clara heard it all without changing her stride. Rose remained her only gentle companion. She came often now, under the guise of errands, slipping away from her mother's gaze to sit in the barn or walk the creek bank with Clara in silence. They didn't always speak. There was comfort in stillness, but when they did, their words held weight. "Sometimes I think you were born into the wrong skin," Rose said one afternoon, pulling grass through her fingers. Clara raised an eyebrow. "I mean not wrong," the girl rushed. "Just too big for this town, too old somehow." Clara gave a small smile. "I wasn't born into the wrong skin. I was born into two stories. One I remember, one I carry like a scar." Rose fell quiet. She reached over and touched Clara's hand, just a brush. They stayed that way until the shadows grew long, but shadows moved in other places too. The preacher's wife had begun calling meetings, quiet, urgent ones in the back room of the church. Not sermons, but concerns, she called them. Talks about purity, order, the creeping threat of unfamiliar ways. Clara's name was not spoken aloud, but it lingered in every pause. One evening, after such a gathering, a fire bloomed behind the boarding house. Clara stood at the stable when the smoke rose. She ran to it with a pale heart hammering, but others were already gathered, forming a ragged chain of water and panic. It was a small fire, just a shed, but the damage was swift. Mrs. Eldon shrieked about witchcraft, about someone cursing her home, and when the crowd turned, Clara was the only one not holding a pail. "She was near the barn," someone yelled. "Saw her running." "I didn't start it," Clara said, calm. "Maybe not," spat the preacher's wife, face flushed with heat and righteousness, "but it follows you, girl. Trouble follows you." No one defended her. Gilmore didn't speak. Rose wasn't there. Even Eli, standing near the edge, kept his eyes lowered. The next morning, Clara found her belongings tossed onto the porch. A note pinned with a nail read, "Boarding house is for decent folk." She took the satchel and left without a word. That night she slept in the loft above the horses, wrapped in her own blanket, breath clouding in the half-light. She didn't cry. That had been burned out of her long ago, but she stared at the beams above her, counting knots like stars. In the morning, Eli found her sitting outside, sharpening a skinning knife. "I didn't know what to say," he offered. "You said plenty," she replied, never lifting her gaze. "I'm sorry." She nodded, not in forgiveness, just acknowledgement. He crouched near her, his coat brushing hers. I can fix things. I've got some pull with the sheriff now. I can talk to him, maybe find you something steadier than mucking stalls. I don't need your fixing, Clara said softly. I need truth. He hesitated, and what truth is that? That this place will never see me as anything but a ghost, something half remembered, half feared. He looked away. You're not wrong, he said. Clara stood. I'm not asking to be accepted. I'm asking to live, that's all. And she walked away toward the woods, toward the river. For days after, she stayed among the trees, setting traps, gathering herbs, listening to the wind speak through branches. Her hands remembered the old ways. Her body softened into silence. She was not hiding, she was remembering. On the 5th day, Rose found her. She came breathless, face pale. They're planning something, she said. The town, they're saying you're cursed, that you're drawing sickness or storms. I heard my mother speaking to the preacher's wife. She said they should drive you out. Clara sat on a rock, grinding juniper berries into a poultice. Let them try. You can't face them all, Rose whispered. I've faced worse. The girl knelt beside her. Please, come back to the stable. Let Eli help. Let me. Clara looked at her, truly looked, and for a moment the hurt in her chest cracked. Not healed, just let in a little warmth. I'll come back, she said, but not to beg. And she did return. That evening, she walked into town just as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of red and ash. She walked straight down the center of the main road, unflinching, her braids trailing like banners. People stared from windows, no one spoke. She went to the church and knocked on the door. The knock echoed through the nave like a challenge. Inside, lanterns flickered along the walls, and a dozen townsfolk sat huddled around the stove, faces red from heat and certainty. The preacher stood with his arms folded across his vest, eyes narrowed. His wife, seated at his right, smiled like frost. When Clara stepped inside, the room went still. She said nothing at first, just stood there in her buckskin and river-washed boots, her face unreadable. The silence lengthened until someone shifted nervously on the wooden bench. Then she spoke. I know what you think of me. The room held its breath. You think I'm wild, tainted, a thing dragged back from the edge. Her voice didn't rise. It settled into the rafters like smoke, curling around their pious discomfort. You think because I pray different, walk different, where what I've been taught to honor, that I'm something to fear. That I don't belong. The preacher took a half step forward, but Clara's gaze stopped him. You're wrong, she said. Miss Hart, he began, voice heavy with decorum, we've shown you Christian patience. You've shown me suspicion, she said, sharper now. You've shown me cold meals and colder beds. I've been spat at, blamed, exiled. For what? For surviving. A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone whispered her name like it was a slur. Clara didn't flinch. She looked to each of them in turn. I came back to understand where I was born, to see if I could live between what was taken and what was given. But all I've found is a town so scared of difference it would burn its own shed to rid itself of a ghost. The preacher's wife rose, indignant. You speak with the serpent's tongue. We've tried to help you. No, Clara said. You tried to mold me, and when I didn't bend, you called it defiance. Eli entered then, drawn by the heat of voices, his boots loud in the stillness. He looked between them, Clara unmoving and the preacher flushed with rage. Is this what we are now? He asked quietly. A town that fears girls who survived more than we ever will. Deputy, the preacher said, his tone a warning. But Eli stepped beside Clara. She's not alone anymore. Gasps rippled, the preacher's wife spat. She's poisoned you. No, he said. She reminded me what truth feels like. Clara turned to go then, the night air waiting just beyond the door. But as she stepped out, a voice called from the back. Let her speak. It was Bet, the cook, the one who'd left her meals by the fire without a word. Clara turned. Bet rose slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. Let her finish. Clara looked at her, then at the rest, and spoke one last time. I'm not asking to sit at your tables. I'm asking you to see me as I am, not savage, not saint. Just a girl made of 2 stories, both of them true. And then she left. Outside, the wind had shifted. The air smelled of thawing loam and early blossoms. She walked past shuttered windows and latched doors, past the place where the rabbit had been left, past the scorch mark on the shed wall. Rose waited for her by the well, her arms wrapped tight around her middle. "They'll talk," she said. "They always do." "Will you leave?" Clara looked toward the mountains, still capped with snow, their shoulders hunched like elders in council. "I thought I might," she said, "but then I thought if I leave they win, they erase me." Rose stepped closer. "Then stay with us." "With you?" Rose didn't speak, she just took Clara's hand. They stood like that as the church bell rang, its peal dull and uncertain. The next morning, Clara returned to the stable as if nothing had happened. Gilmore gave her a new pair of gloves without a word. That afternoon, a boy, one of the younger ones, left a folded scrap of paper by her satchel. It held a drawing of a bird and one word beneath it: sorry. The change was not swift. It came in increments, a door not locked when she passed. A nod from the general store clerk, a child waving without being pulled back. Even the preacher's gaze dulled from fire to smoke. That spring, Clara began teaching Rose how to read the language of trees, the tilt of leaves, the way lichen pointed toward water. She taught her to track elk prints through wet soil, to listen for the songs of dusk. And in return, Rose taught her how to write her name in careful cursive. They spent their days not hidden but separate, together, a small defiance. Eli visited less, but when he did, he came not as a savior, but as a man who knew how to watch without needing to fix. Sometimes he brought her stories from the edge of town. Sometimes he brought seeds. And in time, Clara planted them, first in clay pots behind the stable, then in the long strip of earth beside the creek. The blossoms came slow, but they came. Summer arrived quiet, more a settling of warmth than a season announced. The air turned sweet with clover, and the creek behind the stable sang low over sunlit stones. Clara moved through the days with steady hands, her routine worn in like leather softened by rain, work in the morning, foraging by midday, and hours with Rose under the shadow of cottonwoods, their laughter kept small but real. The town kept its distance, but distance no longer felt like exile. Children still stared, but sometimes they smiled. The preacher stopped glancing her way altogether. Even the preacher's wife, who once spoke of her like plague, now crossed paths with nothing more than a stiff nod. It wasn't acceptance, but it was quiet, and Clara had learned the sacredness of quiet. One evening, as she sat beside the fire pit behind the stable, shaping a small flute from aspen, Eli joined her. He brought 2 tin cups, steam curling from each. "Chamomile," he said, handing her one. "Rose showed me where it grows wild." Clara took it, fingers brushing his. "She's learning fast." "You're teaching her more than tracking." She looked into the cup. "I'm teaching her to see." They sat in companionable hush, the way people do who have shared long silence and chosen to stay. The fire popped. Somewhere down the road, a fiddle played, faint and slow, like a tune trying not to be remembered. "I heard talk of a school," Eli said at last. "Old Widow Green's house. Some folks want to open one." Clara raised her brow. "To teach what?" "Letters mostly, reading, maybe arithmetic if someone can count past 20. A small smile touched her mouth. "They're thinking of asking Rose to help, and I mentioned you." She stilled. "I told them you know the land better than anyone," he said. "That no book teaches what you carry." Clara watched the flames flicker. They'd never allow it. "Maybe not yet, but maybe someday." He sipped his tea. "Maybe this town's got more ears than we thought." Clara said nothing, but her chest warmed, not from the fire. Later, when the stars rose thick and the moon silvered the stable roof, she climbed to the loft alone. There in the space she once used for hiding, she now kept bundles of herbs drying from the rafters, and jars filled with seeds: sunflower, yarrow, wild onion. She sat cross-legged, the flute in her lap, and played a melody low and breathy. A song from the mountain ceremonies, from a time before voices turned her name into something sharp. In the days that followed, she began walking the town differently, not quieter but steadier. She stood a little longer at the store, even held the door for Mrs. Eldon once, who muttered something like thanks. At the blacksmith's, she traded 2 willow carvings for a file to sharpen her blades. No coins exchanged, just nods. Change didn't arrive as fanfare. It crept like vines, unseen until the fence leaned with green. One dusk, Rose brought her a book, its spine cracked and pages yellow. "It's the Bible," she said, almost sheepish. "But the only one with pictures." Clara turned its pages, eyes catching on an image of Ruth gleaning wheat from a field. "She left her people too," Rose said, "followed love into a strange land." Clara traced the outline of the figure. "And still found home." Rose met her eyes. "Maybe that's what we're doing, gleaning what we can, planting what might grow." That summer they planted more. Together they carved out a garden behind the stable, modest but persistent. Beans climbed twine beside wild sunflowers. Potatoes took root under straw. Herbs curled fragrant in the shade. Clara taught Rose how to dry them, how to grind leaves into balm, how to steep roots for sickness. And Rose taught her how to read out loud, not just names, but poetry. One passage lingered in Clara's mind, days after they read it together. "There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." One afternoon, a little girl approached Clara in the garden, watched her tuck soil around a sprout. The girl didn't speak, just held out a flower she'd picked, lopsided, a bit wilted. Clara accepted it. "Thank you." The girl grinned, then skipped back to her mother, who didn't pull her away this time. Clara knelt in the soil long after, the flower trembling in her hand like a tiny flag of truce. When autumn came, the sky turned sharp with wind, and the trees burned gold at their edges. Clara stood outside the church during the harvest festival, watching families gather. Someone pressed a mug of cider into her hand. No one asked her to leave. Rose found her near the fire pit, where apples browned on sticks over flames. "They'll never forget who you are," she said softly. "I don't want them to," Clara answered. She looked out over the crowd. Laughter rose and fell like waves against a still shore. "I want them to remember," she continued, "so the next girl who walks in from the trees doesn't have to carry it alone." Rose leaned against her. The fire lit her face in flickers. "And you," she asked, "what do you carry now?" Clara thought of Ronnie's arms around her, of the wind high in the passes, of hands both white and brown, taking and giving. "Not a wound," she said. "Not any more." She took Rose's hand, let the silence bloom around them. What Clara had once called survival had grown into something larger, rooted and reaching. Not forgiveness, not peace, but something truer, home.